When the Primarch had promised Admiral Coronati a special consultant to help plan the upcoming offensive, tentatively codenamed Operation Slender Scalpel, Ixius personally hoped it wasn't Commander Garrus Vakarian, a consideration made largely for Coronati's sake. Although she wasn't privy to the details, she understood that any consultant personally dispatched by the Primarch would be given much leeway in the planning process, supposedly due to superior subject matter expertise, a leeway even the Admiral couldn't ignore or easily override. While Turian officers were accustomed to shelving their personal reservations in the face of their superiors' orders, Ixius knew that Coronati would not be pleased at having to stomach a Victus-backed Vakarian. The Admiral made it no secret that he held the commander's checkered past in contempt, bore no love for the man's lack of command experience, and considered Vakarian's sudden promotion to commander of an anti-Reaper task force to be made through dishonest backroom deals with the late Primarch Valerius Fedorian. In consideration of this, Coronati had preemptively declared the example the hosting ground of the strategy meeting instead of the defender, despite the fact that Victus had refused to specify who the consultant actually was. It was undoubtedly a snub in anticipation for an unwelcome choice for a special consultant, having the congregation take place on a subordinate's vessel instead of the Admiral's own flagship. Ixius personally did not mind, but that meant the burden of increasing on-ship security was squarely on her shoulders. She did not doubt its necessity. Until 2 weeks ago, Turian-Krogan relations were virtually non-existent, and all the Krogan on her ship were making everyone nervous. When the special consultant finally arrived, however, Ixius realized that her worries would be magnified, despite the fact that it was not Vakarian. She ended welcoming a Turian she had never heard of, Demetrius Ricithi, when he and his escort finally arrived on board the Example. A quick search for his profile, however, made Vakarian's own record look pale. Ricithi had been promoted to the rank of commander years before earning 2 demotions for unethical conduct on the battlefield. Details classified. He spent the years afterwards working as a highly ranked strategist for the Blue Suns mercenary group, working up a resume of equally dubious ethical standards. To Coronati, Ixius declared, Ricithi was little more than a criminal suddenly given official power. I was certain the Admiral was going positively apoplectic in his quarters, raging that the Primarch was manipulating him into accepting Vakarian as an alternative. Ixius did not know it, but Ricithi's assignment as special consultant was made largely out of political concerns. Although the genophage had been cured due to no small part of Turian resistance, many of the Krogan dispatched to Palaven had, until weeks ago, bore vicious grudges against the Turians for the Krogan rebellions. The animosity was barely kept in check by the threat of the Reapers, but Victus had decided that the Krogan forces dispatched to Palaven would trust high command as far as they could throw them. Ricithi was hoped to be a stepping stone, a Blue Suns officer who had working relations with the Krogan of the Bloodpack, which in turn had no shortage of Krogan members returning to Tuchanka upon hearing of the genophage cure. If the Turians' new allies weren't about to trust the hierarchy, the hope was that they would at least have a stable working relationship with Ricithi, who had no problems working with hierarchy forces. Ricithi's influence in smoothing out wrinkles between the Turian and the Krogan was questionable. Mulgus' company were no less scathing towards him than they were to any other Turian, even though it seemed that they were at least more willing to discuss business with the special consultant, who in turn seemed largely unbothered by the commandos. The Turians, in turn, acknowledged Ricithi's presence and new rank as part of the provisional brass, but there was an undertone of animosity towards the Turian who had gone mercenary. Ricithi was treated better by the Turians than they treated the Krogan, and better by the Krogan than they treated the Turians, Castellus, who made several trips through the decks to inspect conditions on board the Example, acknowledged. But I doubt it worked as well as whatever the Primarch or High Command had in mind. But Ixius wasn't remotely worried about Ricithi. He was several steps above her pay grade, and, as far as she was concerned, Admiral Coronati's problem. Her problem, more so than any other, was trying to maintain discipline on her ship. Maybe it might have been less of a problem had the Krogan been introduced on the Example several weeks earlier, but with much of her original crew now largely casualties, many of the men and women on the carrier, regardless of whether they were naval officers, servicemen, ground troops, or other soldiers relocated to the Example because the hierarchy had nowhere else to put them, were barely men and women. The old grizzled officers that remained were holding it together, but it didn't change the fact that they were vastly outnumbered by young replacements barely out of basic. The replacements were well trained and qualified to whatever roles they were assigned, but they were also brash and impetuous. Between the threat of the collapse of galactic civilization and watching the planet burn below without any idea of the fate of their enemies, treating the Krogan with respect was placed on a back burner. In fact, it was probably more accurate to say that some went out of their way looking for a fight to alleviate the mounting tension. Even in times like this, you couldn't stop egos from flaring up, Service Chief Solana Optimi remarked. There was a lot of sizing up on both sides, Turians and Krogans in their little groups, quietly discussing what each group could do to the other, often separated by no more than a single hallway when these discussions took place. It was inevitable that a fight would break out. It was considered nothing short of a miracle, in fact, that the example had been fight-free for the first 2 days. But on the 3rd day, a Turian got into a fist fight with a Krogan. Details of who threw the first punch were lost, or at least purposefully stricken from the record for the sake of public image, but the results were predictable. The Krogan outweighed the Turian several times over, but the Turian was nimbler, and the Krogan wasn't particularly mindful of who else he struck with his near misses. The single fist fight had turned into a brawl, and it took Ixius sealing the bulkheads and beginning to vent the atmosphere on the deck before the belligerents considered the sudden lack of oxygen to be of greater priority than their bruised egos, and, presumably, before on-board marine security opened fire. It threw Ixius into a very uncharacteristic rage, because as much as her dressing down of the Turians who had been involved was probably more worthy of an extranet video streaming upload than the one time one drunk servicewoman got into a fistfight with Admiral Coronati, thought Optimi. The captain knew little would be changed at the end of the day, simply due to the pervading issues that had allowed this breakdown in discipline to occur in the first place, and Ordnott Nakmor seemed completely unenthusiastic in making any kind of reprimand or taking any kind of disciplinary measure against his own Krogan. Ixius did not have long to fume. A call to general quarters was made. Reaper capital ships were attempting to snipe at the fleet defending Nanos. The fleet was just outside the Reaper's effective targeting range, but a task force still needed to be swiftly assembled to chase the sniping Reapers away. Every now and then, an enemy ship would get very lucky and actually hit something. This time, a Reaper got very lucky. A shot from a magnetohydrodynamic weapon glanced across the example. The shot didn't physically connect with the ship, but it penetrated through the carrier's kinetic shields instantly and nearly flash melted a section of the hull. The heat was sufficient to instantly cook Second Lieutenant Curriculus Quiril, Gunnery Chief Nis Oridani, Gunnery Chief Ferran Argovian, and Engineer Iridin Nephitis to death. Operations Chief Tilana Syrian was critically injured by the subsequent chain explosion. She survived, but lost her left leg above the knee. Syrian's incapacitation really shook up Operations Chief Lon Sifiant. Syrian was the only person left on the example who had graduated with him in the same class at basic. Everyone else they once knew was either KIA or MIA. Seeing her unconscious, bloodied, and missing a leg in the example's medical bay nearly broke him. Like almost every other Marine, Sifiant was on the edge, sitting on a ship he couldn't get off, unable to take the fight to the enemy, just waiting for the next Reaper shot to gut them before the example ever had a chance to fight back. This was a slow death, won by 1,000 cuts, as attack, after operation, after skirmish, slowly whittled away the crew. And stagnation was getting to them, with so many injured and medical supplies running low. Sifiant could barely take it anymore. Costellus gave him a mandatory 3-day rest period, in hopes he'd recover, despite knowing that Sifiant, like almost every other Marine, had been resting with little to do for weeks now. The executive officer could only hope that making it an official order would help psychologically. Defending celestial bodies was possibly one of the most demoralizing aspects of naval warfare. Fleets needed to be arrayed to defend a planet or a moon or large installation, and that meant any missed shots were likely to bombard the defended target behind them. It was a tried and true strategy that had been ruthlessly employed by the Krogan against Turians during the Krogan rebellions, and it was happening again more than 14 centuries later, with the Reapers replacing the Krogan. The enemy took pot shots at ships surrounding Nanos, knowing that even though their targeting systems did not go as far as the effective range of their weapons, the moon behind the Turian fleet was sufficiently large for the Reapers to hit something. This was exacerbated by the fact that Reaper targeting systems had a much greater effective range than Turian ones, leaving the hierarchy exceptionally frustrated by the sniping interlaced with skirmishes that attempted to cut off the expeditionary vessels targeting the sniping Reapers from the fleet defending Nanus and its shipyards. As Castellus described it, I think it's safe to say we became the most chronically depressed generation in the entire history of the hierarchy navy.